Okay, thanks, Kathy. Looks like we still have a few more members to join us.
Hello, good to see you.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to be muted, turning off my video from time to time so I'm not like big on YouTube, filling my mouth full of food.
How was your daughter's graduation, Todd?
Thank you so much for asking. It was a magical weekend.
Aw, that's so nice.
Got in Thursday morning after a red eye, and we just had a love fest for a few days. So really nicely done graduation, and she moved in with her older sister on the beach in North Carolina yesterday.
Sweet.
That's not too shabby.
And she starts her new career in a week. So things are looking wonderful for Katie. Thank you for asking.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. Very proud of her. She's done a wonderful job.
So it looks like we're still in need of the mayor, and I think that's it by my count. So we'll wait just another minute or so. Well, I'm sure the mayor is on her way, but we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Oh, right on cue. Here she comes.
I was hanging out trying to get in and I couldn't get in. Anyway, here I am. Hello. Sorry, everyone.
Not a problem.
Waiting. All right, I'm here.
Thank you. So we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order at 6:03 p.m. on Monday, May 24th. This is a meeting of the Citizens Budget Committee as we're considering the biennial budget for the next couple of years. So with that, we just wanted to call everyone's attention to the 4 emails from the public that we received today via email, since they were emails.
Do we need to call the roll? Just a quick question.
You are correct, Abby. Thank you very much. Kathy, would you call the roll, please?
Citizen member Abby Farber.
Present.
Aaron Lim.
Gotta unmute there. Present.
Sheila Waldron.
Present.
Ann Fraser.
Present.
Ed Schwartz.
Present.
Councilor Jones.
Present.
Councilor Bela Ostowski.
Present.
Councilor Baumgardner.
Present.
Council President Aurelia.
Present.
Mayor Walters.
Present.
For city staff, we have City Manager Gabriel Latos.
Present.
Finance Director Breithout.
Present.
Finance Manager Josh Cam.
Present.
And City Recorder Kathy Molesky. Thank you. Did I miss anybody?
John, our Deputy City Manager, John Williams, is expected to arrive around 6:15.
Okay. Thank you, Jerry. And thank you, Kathy. Appreciate it. So again, we'll call attention to the 4 emails we received today. One from Amy Porter, one from Jose Garay, one from Kim Bria, and the last one, if I can get the pages apart, from Mike Waters. So just wanted to call everybody's attention to those, and I'm sure those will be placed into the record for tonight's meeting. So with that, we wanted to start deliberation on the Budget Committee. So this will be item number 7. We're continuing the meeting from last Wednesday, and we'll be beginning with item number 7, which is Budget Committee deliberations and vote. So as we've been doing in the past, I appreciate everybody raising their hand when they wish to speak. I thought I would start off by asking Lauren, in the past, have we deliberated, this is my first time around on the Budget Committee, so have we deliberated by topic, or have we gone through by Budget Committee member and asked them for any comments or questions, or what has been the process in the past?
We haven't really had an exact situation like this in the past where there's been multiple topics to deliberate on, I guess. But I think, and I'll let the city manager speak also, but I think going through topic by topic would probably make the most sense. But I think that's up to the committee on how you want to run this and what the issues are.
Okay, Jerry, do you have any comments?
I'm prepared to talk about the amount budgeted for the city attorney's office and for the creation of a business support position or an economic development position. That person being one and the same. I can talk about that now or at request.
I think we could start off with that, but let me first just remind the committee that we're here as the Budget Committee to review the proposed budget from staff, make recommendations to the City Council on any changes, but we're not here to decide what type of legal services the city should be employing. We can discuss the amount budgeted and whether that's appropriate or not, but we should not, I don't think, discuss the type of legal services as to whether it's an in-house attorney or outside attorney or a combination, something like that. So just a reminder to everybody about that. So with that, Jerry, if you'd like to go ahead and discuss your topics, thanks.
Sure. So I had discussions with some council members about the potential for reducing the amount of legal services, reducing the amount of legal services budget to $400,000 instead of $490,000. That would mean that we would spend about $33,333 per month on our legal services. The general range of the legal service costs has been from $21,000 in January of this year to as high as $43,000 in November of last year. This is an expense that we can't necessarily control. That is to say that at any time we may need attorneys for reasons that we don't foresee. So it is a cost that can fluctuate. I'll leave it at that for now, and then I can talk about the potential for the creation of the economic development position, because it would be that cost savings could be allocated toward the creation of the position. Should I continue?
Yes, please continue.
Sure. So we were considering the creation of that position at about $65,000 in salary, and the benefits would range for a total cost of $100,000 to $120,000. We were able to find other savings that could be accrued through removing the newsletter that would get inserted into the water bills, and then reductions in the personnel costs, that is to say training and travel, from the city manager's budget as well as the finance budget. That gets us to about 101,000, which is at the lower end of that 100 to 120K.
Okay. Thank you. Did you have anything additional? Anything additional?
Yeah. And then finally, just to lay this all out there, there is the potential for using funding from the American Rescue Plan for mitigating the effects of the negative effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of those things include technical assistance that could be provided to businesses, in-kind assistance, and counseling programs. The rules are still, well, the rules are out there, but it's not as if right now that we could call anybody and ask, can we do this specifically, and be told yes or no. Any questions on that? Lauren, if you wanted to add anything?
The only things that I would add is, the estimate for 100 to 120,000 per year is based off of the first year, and obviously with cost of living and step increases, obviously the second year of the budget would be a little bit higher than that. So whichever end of the range, and that depends on the benefit levels of the employee, as we've talked about before. If they have what their medical benefits are, and PERS tier and things like that. The only other thing that we talked about before is that there is the concern of the legal services, the reduction in the cost if there is a cost, if the costs come in more than 400,000 and needing a supplemental budget. That means we're pulling from more reserves because we'll have already spent the money somewhere else. That being said, I don't know if we will come in over 400,000, but it's, we don't know exactly what we're going to need legal services for throughout the year. So that would be my only point to that.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Jerry. So let me poll the committee real quick on how we'd like to proceed. Do you think it's okay if we just go ahead by topic? My thought was to go back through the agenda and go down item by item through the presentations that we received, and just use that as a guide to discuss, topic by topic. But if anybody else had a different idea or would like to put something else forward, please let me know. I see Mayor Walters.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just had a couple more questions about this position with the economic development position, which I think I agree, is valuable to the community, especially our business community. I'm curious, is this going to be a managerial position, a coordinator position? Do we have a sense of that? And I'm wondering if perhaps Councilor Jones, who's done research and shared with us what surrounding cities of our size, what they had. Did they have an economic director? Did they have a coordinator? I know it varies, so I'm just curious. So I don't know if Jerry wants to answer first and then Todd, or either way.
Councilor Jones.
Yes, City Manager, thank you. Chair, thank you. Mayor, thank you. I'll refer you to the May 17th memo that I shared with all of you from a week ago, where it details what some of these various cities are doing. But the answer to your question, Mayor, is it runs the spectrum of the question you just asked. Now, this particular financial proposal that the city manager suggested to you, this is not my area of expertise, so I'll need Lauren to correct if necessary, but from the feedback I've gotten from other business support specialists, economic development directors in other cities, that a salary of $65,000 plus benefits is going to put someone kind of right on the cusp of a title that would be called coordinator, if you will. For example, City of Redmond business support individual told me that to call someone a coordinator, which is more of a support individual would have a salary in the $40,000 to $65,000 range. And then someone as an, in quote, economic development director is going to be more in that 60 to 85 range. So you can see with what the city manager just proposed, it's kind of right on the level between the two.
Very good. Jerry, did you have anything to add?
Sure. I would envision this position, if it was added, would be working under John, the deputy city manager, with community development, buildings. That would seem to be a logical place that it would be housed. The $65,000 amount was one that we felt was fair given our labor costs in the region. And frankly, it was probably at the upper end of what we could afford. So I would just leave it at that.
All right, very good. Abby Farber.
Thank you, and thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Councilor Jones or Todd. I just wanted to ask just a procedural question. Do we want to continue discussing this, or do we want to go the direction, Ed, that you had suggested, just taking this, area by area? I'm amenable for either of them.
All right. Anybody else with any input on that topic? Shall we go item by item? Yes, Councilor Baumgartner.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make sure that I understand correctly where this is going to be discussed. So if we are discussing it further now, I would like to put in my 2 cents, but if we're discussing it somewhere else, let me know and I'll wait.
If we do take the suggestion to go back through the list of, use the presentations as our guide, we would be discussing it again under the second one, which was the economic development plan, and then planning and building. So in that area. So
Great, thank you.
yes, Councilor Bialostowski.
I was basically going to ask the same thing and just point out that it might be helpful to have John Williams here when we discuss the economic development director potential position, just to bounce stuff off of him, since he's the economic development guy at the city to an extent. But the former, now he's in the city manager's department, but he was the did work on that a lot. So thanks.
Sure. Thank you. Ann Frazier.
Yes, I just would like to wait for a discussion on this topic of economic development until John Williams is able to join us, because I have some specific questions for him.
Okay, that I see no problem with that whatsoever. We can get started with going through the list, and then if we get to that topic and he still has not here, we can come back to it later. So any other discussion on this? Okay, seeing none, why don't we just go ahead and start. So what I'm going to do is refer back to our agenda from Monday, May 17th, where we started getting our presentations from staff, and we'll just work our way through item by item until we get to the ones that we heard on Wednesday as well. And then if there's any other topics that come up after going through all those, we can certainly discuss that as well. So first off, we heard from City Council and City Administration topics. So did anybody have any comments regarding those in particular? So I'm not seeing anything there. So we're already down one and we're off to a good start. So next would be economic development, but we'll hold off on that until Mr. Williams joins us a little bit later on. After that was planning and building. Anybody have any comments regarding those topics? Oh, I'm sorry, Warren, please go ahead.
These are two of the areas that we have proposed changes to the proposed budget. As we mentioned in the script for tonight, if it does go to a vote tonight, there was the proposal for the increase in building fees and charges. So the revenue side of $365,000, that's for the school, and an increase in personnel services by 150, and an increase 150,000, and an increase in materials and services by 215. So that does not in effect change the general or the building fund bottom line, but it does increase the budget by that amount because you're increasing the revenues and the expenses by $365,000 from the proposed. And then the other change was the increase in the planning funds for materials and services, and reducing the reserves in that fund by $25,000. That's for some projects that did not get done this year that they wanted to get done next year.
Chair, Lauren, I'm sorry, this is Todd. What page are you on right now?
I was looking at the script for the budget approval tonight. Those were items number 2 and 3 of that. So those were the changes to the proposed budget for the building fund and the planning fund. So overall, it's a change to the proposed budget of a 365, but it is changing the allocation in the planning fund to reduce the reserves by 25,000.
And Abby Farber has a question or comment.
Great, thank you. Lauren, based on what you just said, is that additional personnel, is that personnel increase for the GIS specialist, or is that for something else?
No, that I believe is so because the school district, there's a lot more work on that project, that planning project than expected, or building project than expected. I think that's an early hire, or like a overlap of a hire before someone retires. So.
Thank you. And is the GIS specialist is under this, or is it a different department? You'll have to forgive me.
No, that's in Public Works Support Services, which is in the general fund, but is funded fully by Public Works funds.
Got it. Thank you. Then with that, I just wanted to say that I have no comments on the budget and agree to the increase in the building fees and the other increase that Lauren refers to.
Any other comments on the planning and building section? All right, not seeing any, so we will move ahead. Next up was a presentation from Human Resources. Did anybody have any comments on that? Okay, not seeing any. And if anything does come to mind on any of these topics we've gone past, feel free to call them back up to my attention. Next up, we had Finance and Municipal Court. Any comments on those? Seeing none, we will move to the police.
Sorry, Lauren had her hand up.
I'm sorry, Lauren.
We added IT in right before Finance and Municipal Court, so just so that we don't miss that one eventually.
You are correct. I had it written right here and I skipped right over it. So
Okay.
let me backtrack just a bit to the IT department. Anybody have any comments, questions on that presentation? Abby Farber.
Just once again that I fully support the IT department upgrading the systems, the whole move to the cloud that's been proposed. I think it's a great idea and something that really needs to be done.
Great. Thank you, Abby. Any other comments? All right, seeing none. Now we can move to police. So any comments there? I see Councilor Baumgartner.
Thank you, Chair. I have a concern about the increase for body cameras, and I just need more data about that line item, because although I understand that body cameras can be useful, I'm not sure if that's something that we need to implement for our purposes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Anybody, Jerry or Lauren, wish to make a comment about the body cameras?
I will let Jerry handle that if.
two things. I was just going to text Captain Rollins to jump on because he said he could if need be, but
Okay.
is can you tell me a little bit more about what your concern is, Councilor Baumgartner?
I'm just collecting and doing research, and I see a lot of questions about what they're used for, what they help with, and that the vote seems to be out from both the police, the law enforcement side, and the civilian oversight side, as far as whether this, especially in our situation, whether this would be a tool that would be used to help our department's issues that we've had in the past. But I'm not convinced either way. I would just like to see more data about it.
I did text Captain Rollins and he will be hopping on, so he should be here in a minute.
Okay. So next up, I saw Abby Farber next.
Thank you very much, Ed. It's interesting. When I've been involved with police reform since I really became involved in the Fesser case, and for a while it seemed like body cams were an easy solution to a problem, which is, he said, she said kind of things. Whose perspective are you listening to? What really happened if there are incidents that occur? At the same time, just as Councilor Baumgartner mentioned, the jury's kind of out on this, and I have, I'm conflicted about this. When I once was a big advocate of the body cams, I think there is still information out there that's saying it's cosmetically great, but it's not reducing the incidence of overuse of force, those kinds of things. So for someone who was very committed to police reform, I'm unsure, as Councilor Baumgartner is.
Thank you, Abby. I see we've been joined now by Captain Rollins. So let me backtrack to Councilor Baumgartner. Did you want to ask your question of Captain Rollins, perhaps?
Hello, Captain Rollins. I was just expressing that what I'm reading about the research about the efficacy of body cameras and whether or not West Linn should justify the expense of utilizing them.
Sure. Can everybody hear me? I just want to make sure these headphones are working. Okay. Well, yeah, I think to start the conversation, right, body-worn cameras are a tool, much like the other tools that we have at our disposal, and it's one piece of the puzzle. I don't think they're meant to be an end-all, be-all. They're not meant to solve every problem within either a police department or the relationship between the community, but they're meant to kind of add an extra piece, an extra angle, an extra view. But I think when you start to look at some of the research that people have put together when it comes to camera systems in general, I think most departments have noticed that complaints actually go down when officers wear cameras. And that both sides of these interactions, when they know they're being recorded, right? Professionalism and just the positive interaction seems to go up. So I think as long as they are being looked at for what they are, and it's another tool, it's another angle of a situation, it's another kind of it's almost the objective perspective where the cameras and videos just don't lie. But they show what they show. So any verbal interaction back and forth between an officer and a citizen will be captured as it's said, as it's heard, with voice tone, inflection, kind of the whole 9 yards. And when we get to things like use of force incidents, one thing we have to keep in mind with body cameras is that is one angle. It doesn't show the entire picture. It doesn't show the totality of all the circumstances, but it does add another piece. So I think it just takes us a step closer, in my opinion, to having a more comprehensive view of just the policing interactions in general within the city.
Thank you. I have a couple of other things to say, but since several people have their hands up, I will wait.
Thank you. So let's move to Mayor Walters.
Yes, I was the one that asked for this to be put back in the budget based on discussions that we've had as a council, and also through our police oversight and accountability task force and the other groups that we have been talking with to help us create more transparency and accountability with our police department and improve public trust. So just to be clear, in case people don't know, the body worn cameras themselves are not that expensive. In comparison, what is really expensive is retention of the footage. And the reason that is, because at first I was like, how could it be that expensive? I mean, you could just put it on the cloud or whatever. So it's not the actual retention of the footage in that way, the storage. It's because they need to be kept in a certain way so that when people make public records requests, they can be accessed and redacted as needed. And so that's where the major expense comes in. So some conversations I've been having this week are how can we figure out ways to mitigate some of that cost? And something that I'm looking into is perhaps creating a pool where different law enforcement organizations, perhaps like in the county, can all use the same resource to retain their footage. And maybe that would bring costs down overall. But those are questions that we can get more data and more research. I agree with Captain Rollins. It's not the thing about the accountability. It's all the pieces, right? So we're implementing as many pieces as we can to make sure that we have what we need to provide a little more transparency on both sides. Like he said, complaints go down, but also sometimes if something happens and it will exonerate a police officer as well, then that's an important piece also, especially when you might be dealing with public trust issues anyway. So, I'm not going to lobby for it here. I'm just telling you that was, how it ended up in the budget, and I do feel like it's important. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Council President Aurelia.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So my comments on the subject is that I feel that the conversation is misdirected to the Budget Committee at this point. Even if there was an appropriation of funds through the Budget Committee, this is not a commitment to purchase and use body cams because that conversation has not gone through council yet. And I feel it's more appropriate that if we want to discuss this appropriation of funds, that should occur through a supplemental budget process after we've had the other conversations about all the costs associated with redaction, legal services, retention of the data, the training that goes along with it, and all of the other costs and all the other concerns, as Captain Rollins mentioned, as I'm sure that the Police Oversight Advisory Group will have opinion about. And so there needs to be a robust conversation around this topic. And my feeling about it is that we should table that conversation until the other conversations take place.
Okay, thank you, Council President. Yeah, again, we are confined here to deciding as far as the budget goes. We're not advocating pro or con regarding body worn cameras themselves. So with that, Councilor Bialostowski.
Thank you, Chair. I had a couple of finance related questions for Lauren, I'm guessing. I was just wondering how, I noticed in our script that we have $110,000 potentially for body cameras. How did you come to that number? And also, do you have concerns about drawing from reserves? What's the impact of, instead of taking from somewhere else, drawing from the reserve fund? Thank you.
Great questions. Yeah. So the first question is how I came to the 110,000. Our team, Captain Rollins and Captain Mahuna and Shane Boyle, our IT director, have been going out for competitive quotes. And the first one we received, which was the one at the time of the budget, or, you know, the end of the drafting of the budget, or right after we drafted the budget, was a 5-year contract, with the first year being a little less than 90,000, like 89,000 and some change, and then each year after that being about 30,000 for the rest of the 5 years. So for the 2-year of the budget cycle, it would be the 80 plus the 30, and that's how I got to the 110. The second question was how I felt about drawing from reserves. Well, I don't ever love drawing from reserves. I'm not a huge fan of drawing from reserves, but in this situation particularly, I've mentioned that, you know, in these general funds, including police, public safety fund, we do look like we're in the whole next biennium by about 2.3 million. So this additional cost plus the additional cost from next biennium would add to that. It would reduce our reserves. We'd still be within policy in our public safety fund. We do have that money so that if we were reducing our reserves in that specific fund, we'd still be within our policy. So it wouldn't be like reducing the reserves in the general fund where we only have $11,000. The specific general fund versus public safety fund, we do have enough for reserves, but obviously next biennium it will increase our deficit in reserves. With that being said, you know, this is not a finance director decision. This is a council and decision that I think, you know, if that's what the city would like to do, then we just know that next biennium there's a chance that we'll have to cut other areas. Just like proposing the entire budget with a known idea that we're going to have $2.3 million deficit in reserves next biennium. You know, we know that there's potential that we're going to have to make cuts next biennium. Does that answer your question, or was there something more specific that you're looking for?
No, it does. It does. I was just trying to get a general idea of the impact of that. And then I had one follow-up, if I may, Chair Schwartz.
Certainly, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Captain Rollins. So what do our neighboring jurisdictions look like? I mean, do other cities and the county sheriff's department have body cameras, or do they not? Or what? How do we compare to others not having them?
Well, I know Lake Oswego currently is doing the same process that we are. They're demoing the same company's equipment that Shane and I sat through a presentation with them last week. I know that Tigard has just signed a 5-year contract with Axon. They'll be doing their body-worn cameras. I think they're doing the in-cars as well. Oregon City uses Axon body-worn cameras. I'm not sure if the Clyde County Sheriff's Office has cameras either in a full or a limited capacity, but many of the jurisdictions around us either have body-worn cameras, have in-car cameras. Lake Oswego has had in-car camera systems, I think, for over a decade. The department where I formerly worked had in-car cameras for over a decade. So, you know, the camera systems just, you know, it's nothing new, but I think we're getting to the point in our development, just as a society, where these are just becoming more and more mainstream, more and more expected, and they're more and more effective. I think just that cameras themselves have gotten much better over the years. And then with the ability to store this information on the cloud as opposed to hard servers, have just opened up the ability for more and more agencies to jump on this piece of technology and use it as a tool.
Are we good, Mr. or Councilor Bialystowski? Okay, thank you. I think next up was Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that, but the city manager was ahead of me. I'll go after him.
Okay, I lost track. Jerry?
My comments tangentially related to this, I'll wait until we get to the next topic to discuss about police in the budget.
Okay, thank you. Now, Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate what Council President Aurelia shared because my mind was going in the same place. At the start of our meeting tonight, Chair, you cautioned us, and I think rightfully, that we need to steer away from substantive policy conversations and just focus on the budget. And yet, I think the current conversation tells us it's challenging to do that. It's hard to have budgetary conversations without talking about the meat of the issues that are at the heart of that. But be that as it may, I did want to flag what Ann Fraser shared at a recent meeting about the potential for piloting the body-worn cameras as opposed to going all in from the get-go here. Not that I'm advocating for that, I'm just intrigued by it. And I wanted to ask the city manager if for any reason he has any response to that, or Captain Rollins as a representative of the police department, if you have any response to the idea of piloting the program as opposed to going all in from the get-go. Thank you.
Captain, if you want to go first.
Sure. That's certainly an option, and a couple of the companies that we've talked to have kind of suggested that. I know that before any pilot process or a full-blown process of body-worn cameras can begin, there needs to be talk of policy and agreement with CCPOA on those particular on the kind of rules and regulations and the procedures of body-worn cameras. I believe that would be kind of a substantive change in their working conditions. And so there are a couple of first steps to go through when it comes with policy building, and then taking that to the union to get that agreed upon before I think even a pilot program can begin. But that's certainly a viable option. And again, the companies, I think at this point, because they're so eager to earn business, they're going to offer up a couple cameras to kind of test out.
Thank you.
I would just add that I think, as the mayor mentioned, the cost of the cameras is really on the data and not the actual cost of the cameras. So there wouldn't necessarily be much savings by purchasing a smaller set of cameras, smaller number of cameras.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Jones, did you have any follow-up? Okay. I believe Mayor Walters was next.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to say something that's sort of been on my mind, and it's about council goals. And I don't really specifically want to talk about policy, but we spent a long time establishing our goals, and among those were DEI, sustainability, economic development, and police reform and accountability. And I just want to make sure that those are reflected in the budget that we're going to approve, because that's really important to me. I don't feel like we're really doing the work as a council if we're not if our goals are not reflected in the budget document. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Baumgartner.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for Captain Rollins about if there's a general sense, if this is supported by the rank and file, or if you're able to say that this is a tool that people would like to have access to in our police department.
Well, I haven't taken an official poll, but
Unofficial.
Unofficially, I have not heard any negative pushback when it comes to body cameras. I know Peter and I are 100% completely on board. Can't come fast enough, in my opinion. And again, there's been chatter amongst the officers, and have not heard any negative pushback whatsoever.
Thank you. That's important. I was also wondering if there might be funds any offset from insurance. I don't know, Jerry, if you know about that, if CIS might offer any offsetting of funds for this, or if we could partner with any agencies that are also implementing camera systems. I think someone else suggested that, that we could somehow offset the funding that way. Thank you.
Jerry, did you have a response on that question?
I don't know. I'll have to get back on that.
Okay, thank you. And Abby Farber.
Thank you very much. I am very torn about this entire thing. I mean, from a, personal perspective, it seems like this is a good idea. Transparency, accountability. And I know we're not talking, we're not supposed to be talking policy, but it's really hard not to in this, a line item that has been earmarked for something very specific. The research that I see when if you just Google, do police body cams reduce complaints? The report is mixed. It is not universally, yes, they absolutely reduce complaints. Some smaller police forces have stopped using them because they're too expensive. It's definitely mixed. And I am starting to lean toward what Councillor Aurelia said, and Councillor Jones affirmed that let's let the city council do something, ask for something more comprehensive. Let's not rush into this. And I'd like to point out that at some point, hopefully soon, we will be getting possibly a new police chief who might want to weigh in on this as well.
Thank you, Abby. Any other comments or questions? I'll just add that, yeah, you're right, Abby, as it is difficult to separate the topic from the budget item in a sense, but I'm supportive of including this money in the budget. I think then we can have that further discussion once the city council takes up the decision as to whether to actually move ahead with body cameras or not. But as far as including it in the budget, I think it's a good option to provide to the city council and to the city staff if they want to have body cameras available. So with that, I see a few more hands coming up. So I'm not sure who was first this time. So we'll go, okay, Jerry?
Captain, just a few minutes before the meeting began, I sent an email to everybody about a little bit of a discussion that we had about the behavioral health position. Can you, as long as you're here, can you comment a little bit more about it and share that email? But, talk a little bit about what you wrote and the position in general.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so the position in general is a resource position that we are going to share with Lake Oswego. And I guess kind of in a nutshell, Amber is going to perform basically the same duties that we received from Clackamas County through their mental crisis response team and formerly the BHU team. So for instance, if we would go to a call where we had a person either dealing with a mental crisis, we could call this group of specially trained individuals, and if available, they could sometimes come out to the scene and just help be a resource and help with the communication piece, help work through that call, because oftentimes the outcomes of those calls were not enforcement actions. They were either medical type calls, or they were assisting this person in getting resources and help that they needed. And so Amber being a direct call to us is going to open up a lot more availability than we had through Clackamas County. So with either BHU or MCRT, we had to share those 2 or 3 people with the entire county. And so the availability for them to actually respond out to the scene in person to give us the assistance that we looked for sometimes was minimal, just to be honest. Amber just working between Lake Oswego and West Linn, there's going to be a higher degree of availability that she'll be able to come out and respond in person, and also be able to assist us with the follow-up to keep in touch with these people and make sure they got the services that they needed. So on top of that, we are still going to be participating in the CIT training as a way to get more training to our officers individually. So for years, Clackamas County has done their own 40-hour CIT training program. They usually did 2 a year pre-COVID, and we have done our best to try and get as many West End officers through that training as possible. COVID put a halt on that for a little bit last year, but they are going to start that back up this year. And I have every intention of putting as many West End officers through as many of those week-long trainings as we can. And then really the vision going forward, which I know we share with Clackamas County because we've started to have some of these discussions, is to try and find a smaller group of officers within the department who have a specific interest in CIT and go above and beyond just the 40-hour training and get into longer term, more specific, more intensive training where those officers can then become a much more useful resource to their coworkers on these types of calls. So in the event that Amber is unavailable, or even if she is, we have a subset of officers within the department with a much higher level of skill and training and experience when it comes to mental health crisis, CIT, so we can start to identify those officers and they can become the leaders and the trainers within the department. So that's kind of the vision going forward when it comes to CIT.
Thank you. I think Councilor Jones was next. Oh, you changed your mind. Gotcha. Lauren.
Well, I just wanted to confirm at the end here that I think I heard that we are planning on adding the 110 for the body cameras to this biennium, and then the council was going to come back at a later date to make the decision if they were actually going to do them or not. Is that the case? I thought that might be the case, or is that?
Well, that is what is included. Is that included in
the motion? Yeah.
In the motion, right. So when we actually get to the motion, then
okay,
whoever makes the motion can either read from the script or modify as they desire, and then we'll deliberate on that, on the specific motion, right?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Councilor Jones?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry, everyone, I'm waffling on this comment. I just wanted to, based on what Abby said, I wanted to make sure I didn't miscommunicate my own thoughts on this. I am not opposed at all to this funding, and I'm comfortable putting it into the budget. I appreciate the mayor bringing it forward. I appreciate recommendations from the task force, and it's compelling to me for Captain Rollins to say that he and Deputy Mahuna are fully in supportive of it, and in Captain's words, it can't happen soon enough. So I'm comfortable moving forward with the funding personally. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this topic of the police budget? And nope, seeing none, I think that will conclude that discussion. Thank you, Captain Rollins, for taking time out of your evening to join us. Appreciate that very much.
Thank you for including me. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too. So now we can move on to library. Did anybody have any comments or questions about the discussion we heard on the library? Seeing nothing, we will move to general fund non-departmental. Any questions or comments there? Seeing none, we'll move to debt service fund. Yes, Councilor Bialystowski.
What page is the non-departmental? Thank you, Chair. I was trying to figure out, because Rebecca Hollenbeck had asked us to at least discuss raising her funds from 20,000 to 32,000. I couldn't remember if that was in the non-departmental section or somewhere else in the budget, but I thought it might be in non-departmental.
It is in the non-departmental, and that's on page 56 of the budget.
Okay, well, I just wanted to bring that up, and just in case we wanted to discuss that or deliberate on that possibility, just to make sure that she's heard.
Absolutely. Thank you. Mayor Walters?
Yeah, I'd be interested in it getting Lauren and Jerry's opinion on if we can't do the full increase, is there an amount that you think that we could do to support her? I think she currently gets $20,000 a year, so I think it would be nice to, see if we had room to increase that. But also knowing that if we're going to be hiring this economic, development person, that their supports may lighten her load a little bit as well. So, but is there a portion of that money that we might be able to spare?
I can field that if you want. Okay. So I think that maybe this conversation should be had in totality with the economic position, economic coordinator, because it's in the general fund. We have $11,000 total for the biennium over our reserves in the general fund. And so if we are adding funds, I'd like to know exactly how much we're adding from where, if that makes sense. So if we're gonna fund the economic development position, where are we pulling those funds for? If we're gonna add money to this allocation for the grants to Main Street, where are we pulling that money from? And I think that that's a discussion of multiple items versus just one area, if that makes sense.
Okay, I think it does. Councilor Baumgartner, did you change your mind? Okay. All right, so were there any other, so Lauren, is that a topic for the future or is that a topic for right now?
I think that we were holding off on the economic development section until John Williams was here, and he is now here. So I think that, being towards the end of the general fund, it makes sense to jump into that now, and if everyone else is okay with it, but I'm glad, I'd be happy to jump into it now.
Okay, so that will conclude the general fund non-departmental, but we will backtrack now to economic development. And Mr. Williams, thanks for joining us tonight. John, so did we have questions now regarding those topics for economic development? Questions or comments? Yeah, Ann Fraser.
Yes, thank you, Ed. Yeah, I have some questions about the economic business position, but before considering that position, I wanted to step back and look a little bit more globally at the whole situation of economic development, business support in West Linn. Maybe look at some of the history and staffing issues around this whole topic. And I had some specific questions for John. So over the last 4 to 5 years, how much of an FTE has really been put into economic development? Do you want the questions one at a time, or do you want me to go over all my questions?
Either way, I appreciate that you were able to email the questions in, so I have a good sense of what they are. I'm happy to take them on in whatever order you'd like. Okay, well, why don't you answer that one first about how much resources really been put into this area over the last few years? Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that question. So I've been with the city about 4 years, I guess, and in that time, I have been the main staff person with an economic development responsibility. That's not to say other folks don't do tasks related to this. We have folks in planning that do great projects related to business zoning. We have folks in communications that help us get outreach to business. Lauren and her team have helped us with business grants. But none of those folks have economic development as one of their main responsibilities. That's only me. But as we talked about in a previous meeting here, I'm stretched in a number of directions. The exception to that has been, some of you will remember, we had a contractor named John Morgan working for us. He was working for the city on a contract basis before I was hired.
And John was not nearly full-time. He was very part-time, and he was working on the waterfront project, and he also staffed the Economic Development Committee. So in the last couple of years, that's really what it's been, sort of a team effort cobbled together. Before that, some of you will recall that there was the previous Community Development Director, Chris Kerr, spent quite a bit of time on economic development, but there was a different structure in the city management group at that time. There was an assistant city manager as well as a city manager. So I'm essentially doing sort of what used to be two jobs. So it's a little bit of a different structure. I guess another way of answering that question is in my time, or from what I've heard, there's never been a full-time economic development position at this city.
Okay. And the second question I had was the focus more on supporting existing businesses, or was it in bringing in new businesses or other economic entities, manufacturing or whatever?
And I think that question is about the last few years, if I understand. Yeah. Well, West Linn doesn't have a lot of available commercial land, developable commercial land. And so I think a lot of the focus has really been on assisting existing businesses with projects that they contemplate, whether that's expansions or connecting them to grants, things of that nature. We have some of our commercial areas are owned by major, for example, we have ROIC, which is a Fortune 500 company that owns two of our major commercial areas. They have resources to recruit businesses into those centers beyond what we could ever have. Braemore is a very large company that owns another one of our commercial centers. We have a major property owner on Main Street. So in terms of bringing business to West Linn, that's really been handled by the owners of property, I would say, typically. More where we have focused our efforts is on the small business side and assisting the small businesses we have. When we find things to help the Willamette Falls Paper Company or their predecessor, that has always been a big goal of ours, but they're pretty self-reliant too. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah,
happy to go into more detail for sure.
No. So I think the next couple of questions really you've covered in what you've said already. But what I'm hearing, a lot of people think that this is a very important addition to the city staff. And because there appears right now to be a lot of need amongst the business community. But I'm wondering how much of this present perceived need is really due to the COVID situation, and might, 2 years from now, might not be nearly as acute as it is right now. Do you have any thoughts about that? Do you see it? I mean, say 2 years ago, were you seeing the same needs before COVID came along?
COVID has certainly changed the picture of what businesses are needing. The economic impacts for some, especially in hospitality and things related to tourism, they have really taken a huge hit. And so those businesses, many of you know them, you're friends with business owners or you frequent businesses, they have dipped into personal savings, they've taken out second mortgages on their homes, they have not taken salaries for themselves. So the economic consequences to the small business owners have been pretty dire. And I think that has really overwhelmed any other needs they had, which it was a much different set of questions we were getting back in time. The number one thing that I heard when I started here was that rents are too high in West Linn, and they wanted the city to do something about that. And our ability to do something about private sector rents is pretty limited. But that was a huge issue. I think, so I would say certainly pandemic recovery, just getting financial assistance to the businesses to dig them out of the holes in and to make a plan looking forward is almost on everyone's mind. Some businesses don't have that problem, but a lot of them do. The other needs that we've heard about a lot is connecting businesses into more of a unified whole. That's something that the Chamber and Main Street are working on. And I think building ways for them to have networks amongst themselves is really important. And another piece we have talked about is related to doing some of the zoning work in some areas of West Linn to make sure that those areas become what we want them to be. And maybe that sounds a little coded. Really what we're talking about, projects we've talked about before, the Highway 43 zoning examination, the West Linn waterfront project. So those are sort of long-term economic development projects that we're doing. So those are some of the areas that we see. I've heard Councilor Jones, Councilor Bielostowski, others of you mention other things that are needed, and I would agree. There's a pretty broad set of things that businesses need, and what we've always been trying to figure out through these recent discussions is what exactly is needed and who's the best agency or person to provide them.
Mm-hmm. So can I conclude from what you said that even though this is a real need in the short term, but it could also be a position that's needed full time in, say, 2 or 3 years or 3 or 4 years from now. What I'm trying to avoid is the decision being made on the pandemic and the needs of the pandemic and not on the long-term needs of the city. Now, I know you can hire somebody and you can also get rid of them if you decide you can't afford them or that there's not enough work for them. But I think it would be good to take a long view if we can. So that's why I'm asking all these questions. I'm done with my questions now. You can you can relax.
Phew. Excellent.
So you can relax, except we have five more people who have questions for you as well.
What? Okay.
So next up, I believe, was Council President Aurelia.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mr. Williams, we heard this evening from Director Breithaupt, and Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong, but you mentioned that there is the possibility of using federal funds associated with the pandemic for this position. And, you know, if that's a possibility, then I would encourage us to look at that option. And I think the other important position, which is the emergency manager position, have both arisen as a result of the pandemic. And I think this economic development director position would help the city in being more nimble. And as a council, I know over the last couple of years, we've moved to open the resource box to give staff the ability to move more quickly towards assistance for our business partners who have suffered greatly as a result of the governor's orders, and of course everybody's needs to quarantine and isolate and do everything necessary to control this COVID-19 virus. But you know, we're starting to turn that corner, and I think we need that nudge. And so I would be supportive of staffing this position. What I would ask, though, is for the city manager and the city council to have discussions about what are the tangibles, what are our goals, how do we measure them, and how do we know that we're being successful so that we see a return on our investment. And thank you for the opportunity to speak on the subject.
Very good. Thank you, Council President Aurelia. I believe Councilor Jones was next.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, John Williams, for being here tonight. Before you came on tonight, John, the question came up as to what level on the management hierarchy, if you will, this person would be hired and where they would be positioned in the city. I did not feel equipped to answer that question because I don't have the expertise that you do, but I threw out for what it was worth based on the salary range we're talking about the person, somewhere in the $65,000 range, give or take, that the individual would probably be at some kind of coordinator level, if you will, whatever that title means, but that it was suggested by the city manager that this is likely someone that would report to you. Do you have a vision, if this position was hired, as to what that person's authority would be within the city hierarchy and who they would report to? Thanks.
Thank you for that question, Councilor Jones. It's one that I actually haven't spent the most time on among the various facets of this. I think it probably would make sense to have that position report to me, given the other things that I oversee. I think that probably makes sense rather than locating it within the planning department, for example, which I think would be the other option. I think you would want it to have a broader focus. And if that is the salary level you're talking about, then that type of title is what you would probably be looking at. There are a number of folks out in the world who are looking for that step up into, a steady government job. Typically, these jobs, folks that apply for them are people that work for nonprofits, or are otherwise involved and looking for a fuller time job with benefits that's a little more stable. There are a lot of those folks out there. So yeah, I think that's where it makes sense to have it housed. But I apologize for missing the meeting, and if that contradicts anything that Jerry said when you asked him earlier, then I have some explaining to do.
You're golden. Thank you.
Okay, now I'm not sure who was next. Councilor Baumgartner.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, John, and everyone else for their thoughtful comments. I would just like to say that, of course, I reinforce everyone's concern about small businesses and what they're suffering, and the ongoing challenges of being a business in West Linn. I also would like to say that although I'm supportive of this position, in theory, I'm mindful of the upcoming fund imbalance we've been talking about, the shortfall, and being mindful of not getting into positions where we made decisions in the past that didn't represent what funds were available in a couple of years down the road. So if staff is in support of this position being necessary, I would defer to their expertise. If this isn't something that can be handled with the additional FTE that we've discussed, and our positions are covered already from different departments, then again, I support it, but I would like to scrutinize it carefully. And so I appreciate everyone's input. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Abby Farber.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, everybody, because this is an important discussion, one to be considered carefully. I just have a few observations. I agree with much of what everyone is saying, that this is important, that we need to promote businesses within our community. I'd like to add into that there are more than just the storefront businesses. There are home-based businesses throughout West Linn. In fact, one of the things I believe we're known for on a demographic basis is a lot of people do run their businesses out of their home, whether they're consulting, whether they're working for people who are outside of West Linn or doing some kind of that work. So I'd like there to be that consideration. I like Councilor Baumgartner. Do worry about, in 2 more years, we're going to be looking for cuts. And is this the best way of supplying that support? And this is for council, I think, to determine, could these funds perhaps be used to beef up the Chamber of Commerce, who I know the Federal Small Business Administration has put more funds into some of those networks to help support businesses. And could we say continue that regardless of what's going on with COVID? So just those observations, and especially the one about, looking at this through perhaps an equity lens, in terms of equity being the different kinds of businesses that are within our community.
Thank you, Abby. Councilor Bialystowski.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to share with the committee that I feel like economic development, when we think about a shortfall that we have in several years in the next biennium, I feel like looking at our zoning and for example, on 43, and bringing in some smart growth, and by growth, I mean buildings that are building upwards and not building out into other areas. That brings in SDC money to the city. And then that, when you bring in SDC money, you're helping to offset a deficit to an extent. So I feel like planning and economic development planning in particular is really important for the economic health of our city. So I just wanted to ask John Williams, to the extent that we do hire an economic development person to work under you, could they work on issues such as Highway 43 rezoning and other zoning concept in the city to make sure we're best utilizing our land and focusing on helping offset the deficit in that way? Because in that sense, it could pay for itself if an economic development person completes or works hard on the rezoning, and then it brings in money from the related development that takes place. It could help actually pay for itself. So I just wanted to ask you if you envision it being something that they could work on the zoning issues that we have.
Yes, thank you. I think having a person in-house, that the person that you are all discussing might not be the one that leads that project, but if we had them on hand, I think we could use them as a resource, both in bringing economic development knowledge to the work and in doing outreach to the business community about the work. I do think we would still want some professional planners doing the fun planning parts and the code work, and the architects doing design standards on Highway 43, which I think is really going to be critical to community acceptance or community consideration of these changes. So I think part of the team, but perhaps not the leader of the team, is the way I've been thinking about it.
One quick follow-up, if I may, Chair.
Sure.
Based on that answer, this person would not be completing the work, but they could help with the work. So are you envisioning, or would we need even more additional funds to complete these sorts of important projects? And I'm guessing the answer is yes, but I just wanted to clarify that. So we would have to potentially allocate some additional funds to these projects to get them done, in addition to hiring this person.
The extra funds that are not in the budget, and we discussed this under the planning last time, planning department last time, were specific to that Highway 43 project. We have funds, adequate funds, we think, for waterfront, the clear and objective standards, a couple of the House Bill 2001. It's the Highway 43 project that we needed to find a little more for. And there was a conversation about potential grant options. I think that's very possible. If we had some more staff support from the position that you're discussing, that drops the number too. So I think it's potentially a lower number. I hate to promise a project and say grants are going to be part of the funding for it. That worries me. I worry about overpromising and under-delivering. We've struck out on a grant for this project once before. We're hoping to apply again for 2 different other sources, but you never know.
All right. Councilor Baumgartner.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, if this is the appropriate time, to advocate on behalf of the additional funds for Main Street. Is this the appropriate time to talk about that?
Yes, I think that falls into this topic. Sure.
Okay. I just wanted to reiterate the importance of the job that Main Street is doing, specifically Rebecca Hollenbeck. Since she's come on, she's repaired some relations between businesses and Main Street. that were needing some extra help, and she has worked tirelessly. She works at least 40 to 50 hours a week. I don't think anybody would argue that that's not true. She's making sure that we have a farmer's market and special events that bring lots of business into the community. And I can't sing her praises enough. Plus, she's just a really high caliber person with a lot of knowledge. And I'm just afraid she'll go somewhere else. So I'm hoping that we can at least give her a little bit of a boost. It might not be as much as she's worth, but I think it would be very important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions on economic development? Yes, Lauren?
I think Councilor Aurelia mentioned the potential of the funding for the business the economic development person coming from the ARP funding. We have been looking over that internally and to see if we think that it could come from that source. And we think that there's a potential that it could come from that source, but we're not 100% sure. It would have to mostly be related to business recovery from COVID. And I know Jerry just raised his hand, but maybe also John has some topics to weigh in on that. So I don't want to go out and say, yes, we can fund the entire position by ARP money, because it would have to be related to business recovery. And there's some specific guidelines that say how we would have to fund that. So I think John's nodding his head yes to.
So,
Yeah,
Jerry?
Jerry, were you going to answer that too?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, I mean, Lauren's described it accurately. It's specific in the Treasury guidance. It specifically says you cannot use these funds for general economic development activities. That's stated. So you really have to tie your use of the ARP funds to pandemic recovery. As we've talked about here, a lot of businesses in West Linn, have a lot of needs related to pandemic recovery. So I think it's a straight face. You could have a significant share of the funding for this position, at least for a while, come from ARP. I think over time, that becomes more and more difficult to justify. We don't know exactly how rigorous the review is going to be, but as I said, I think at a previous meeting here, my proposal to you would be, let's keep our hands clean and try to follow the rules. And so I think we would be looking for a maximum, some share, 40%, 60%, 30%. We haven't quite figured it out of what this position would do. Would be clearly related to pandemic recovery. And maybe in the first 6 months, it's 90%. If what they're doing is going around and helping people with business plans, doing a round of business grants, and connecting them to grant resources elsewhere in the ARP, it's easy for me to imagine.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? I just had one quick question, kind of piggybacking on Councilor Bialystowski. If we were to, if the city were to hire this person for economic development, and then they were successful and business in West Linn picked up, perhaps we added additional businesses, or certainly helping the businesses that are struggling right now. Would there be a net revenue, foreseeable net revenue increase to the city based on those activities that could arguably help pay for this position?
Well, Lauren, I'll take a stab at that. There's a couple of ways that businesses contribute financially to the city's bottom line. If we're talking strictly the city, obviously there's a whole host of community benefits to having business in town. If we're talking about your work as a budget committee, a new building pays system development charges. Is that a benefit to the city? You could say it is, you could say it isn't. It helps build projects that are required because you're adding development. So that's one way to think of it. Certainly there's property taxes. That's an obvious one. The city gets a share of property taxes. It's relatively small share, as you've heard from Lauren and Jerry earlier in this process. And then from there, it gets less direct. It's utility fees, it's business license fees, things like that. The thing you're looking for me to say is the thing that I would say if I was answering this question in Washington State, which is, yeah, we'd get a ton of sales tax revenue. We don't, and so it's all less direct. Economic development, a lot of economic development in Oregon is about community benefits, creating jobs for people in your community. Obviously, we don't have a lot of manufacturing in West Linn, so we're really service and retail and restaurant oriented in our business. Perhaps that could change, but that's sort of where we are now. Does that help a little?
Absolutely, and you're correct. Certainly, you know, a thriving business community is good for the city. It's good for the citizens, no question about that. I was just looking to kind of quantify it a little bit more from the budget perspective, which I think you did. So thank you for that. So any other questions or comments on this topic? Not seeing any. So I think we are finished with economic development. So we can pick up back where we left off, which I think was debt service fund. Don't know if there was any comments or questions on that topic. Don't see any there. So why don't we move now? I'm going to jump to our agenda from this past Wednesday. And we'd start off with the personnel services, all funds, which I think also includes the legal services expenses. So did anybody have any more comments or questions on that topic or personnel services in general? Abby Farber.
Gosh, help me. I can't remember if we've already talked about the legal services issue. I know, Ed, you pointed out what Jerry Gabrielatos had also pointed out, that it is not our job to decide, you know, contract out, in-house attorney. With that being the case, I support what Lauren presented about perhaps taking the budget down a bit and then passing it on to the people who are supposed to decide these things, city council and city staff.
Thank you, Abby. I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. Any other comments or questions?
I'm sorry, Chair, this is Todd. I'm just lost. What page are we on?
Lauren? What page was legal? It was
So legal services is actually in the city council department. So that's on page 36. But it's actually, it's under professional, or it's under city attorney services instead of the personnel services, but it's it kind of crosses that line. It's personnel and M&S at the same time, sort of.
okay. Ann Frazier.
Thank you, Ed. I definitely support reducing the amount in this budget line to 400,000. I think that's very reasonable, but I totally support the idea that it's the policy making job of city council to decide how to cover the legal advice needs of the city. So I would strongly recommend that city council take this up as a topic soon and get it sorted out, since there's obviously a lot of need to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on topic in general or legal services in particular? Seeing none, I think we can move on then. So the next item was Public Works, and we could take that as just a general topic, or we could go item by item, as there were several different topics under Public Works. So any suggestions on how we handle that? I think maybe we could just take it as the general Public Works topic, and if there's any comments or questions, we can address those. Abby.
I think this was the department, Lauren and Jerry, correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about adding the GIS specialist. Is that correct? that I am in support of that. Just wanted to put that out there. It's additional position. I think their case has been very clearly made of the need for it.
Thank you, Abby. Any other comments, questions? I will just state I was going to agree with Abby. I was going to make that comment as well, that I think the GIS person is needed in the city. It sounds like it's a position that will benefit the city going forward. It's not a short-term need. It's definitely a long-term requirement for public works. Okay, so with that, I think we can move on to parks then. Any questions or comments on the presentation we saw from Ken Warner? Councilor Bialystowski.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is an appropriate time to bring up the parks and maintenance fee, I'm guessing. And I was just going to ask Lauren if she could talk about what's in the budget currently in terms of the fee, like how much it's at right now as proposed increase, and the different types of increase we could do to get certain numbers of staff. So like how much of an increase would we need to get 2 additional parks maintenance workers and how much to get 3, just so I know the different numbers. I think it's 88 cents or something, but I'm not certain. Thank you.
Yeah, I can feel that. So as of, let me look here. It's actually in the very back of your binders under the master fees and charges schedule. So the last section on page 7, there's a comparison. There's also a detailed parks and maintenance fee on page, I'm trying to find it here. Hold on. Page 16 under 1610. And those fees change every July. Right now, for a single family residence, it's $16.60 per month. Generally, every July we increase that 5%. So the 5% would have been the 88 cents. Just making sure that that's, yeah, actually, yeah. So that would have been that. And we are proposing to actually increase that to $1.66, which is an additional 88 cents. Or I'm sorry. Oh, 83 cents. I'm sorry. Actually, we've been saying 88 cents, but it's 83 cents as I do the math. So it's actually 83 cents additional each month per household. So that would be the 10%. And that we figured gets us about 1 additional parks maintenance worker. So that would be about 83 cents per month per household. We have about 8,500 households. So that's about $85,000 a year. So if we wanted to increase, to add additional parks and rec workers, I would, each one, like an additional 5% for each would be probably sufficient. So an additional 83 cents, 85 cents.
Okay. All right. Any other comments or questions on parks? Yes, Ann Frazier.
I'm trying to understand these numbers on page 16 of the fees schedule. You said a 10% increase. The increase from July 1, 2019 to July 1, 2020 was at 5%, was it not? I mean, I thought we had heard in a previous meeting that the normal increase had been 5%, but that this year we were asking for a 10% increase. So it was double. So it would be more like $1.60 or.
Yeah, $1.66 is what we have. So if you look at page 7 of the master fees and charges, it's 10% increase.
Yes.
Down at the very bottom there. It's going from 1660 to 1826.
Right. And that covers one extra person, one extra park person?
Approximately, yeah.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
On the lower step level, you know.
Sure.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on parks? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Does anybody have any just overall comments regarding the proposed budget then, before we head into the motions to approve the budget? Yes, Perrin Lim.
I just want to echo most everyone else's comments regarding the economic development person. I think it's a great idea looking forward, especially. We're coming out of the pandemic. It could be very beneficial, whether it's the waterfront or the Highway 43 plan. I'll also echo what Councilor Baumgartner and Aurelia have mentioned, and others. If there's any overage in legal fees, it's going to make Lauren and Jerry's life a little bit stressful, or maybe a lot stressful. So that's a variable that we cannot control. But I think it's worth the risk. The reward is worth the risk there to me.
Thank you. Abby Farber.
Just that, as with the others, I very much support the Parks Department, the addition of the staff person. As I've commented, I'd love to give them 3 additional staff people, given the work that they do and anticipated, and how much we value parks. But I'm willing to settle for, or to agree with what staff has proposed, also based on the deficit we face.
Thank you. Thank you, Abby. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Mayor Walters.
Here, I think, yeah, Ken said he needed 3 additional workers. Is that correct? So, yeah, so I mean, I would be comfortable at least increasing that 10% to 15% to do 2. Is that correct? That would be 2 maintenance workers.
Approximately.
I feel like we sort of, we have had a history of not increasing revenue in places where people have expectations living here that certain things will be handled. And I feel like if we have an opportunity to do that right now, and it's not a huge amount to increase the bill per household per month. And we also have in place assistance funds for people who have, they have trouble paying their utility bills. I feel like we should probably just go ahead and increase that amount. I don't know how anyone else feels.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Baumgartner.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention my growing concern that I'm hearing more and more from people about the debris piles, and adding parks maintenance workers is very important, and I support the parks being kept taken care of. I know that's very important to people, but I'm also very concerned about the safety of these debris piles, and hope that that we can also be making sure people understand that that's going to get addressed.
Thank you. Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mayor, for that suggestion. I am not opposed to raising the parks fee instead of 10%, 15%. I just want to make sure I understand the math correctly, Lauren. Every 5% is an additional 88 cents per month per utility bill recipient. Is that correct?
It's actually 83 cents additional. I think the math was just done wrong, probably by me when I originally did it for some reason. And so I actually now looking back at it, I think I would recommend if we're going to add 2 to go up to like the 16%, which would, you know, be a total additional over the 5% of $1.83. So that would be $1.83 more than the original 83 cents. So an additional, an additional $1.83 for a total of $2.66 increase. And that would generate that $1.83 would generate approximately $186,666. So that should pay for, you know, 2 parks maintenance workers.
Chair, may I continue?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Lauren, do I understand correctly that we more or less raise each fee 5% per biennium? Can you, and I don't expect you to know this off the top of your head, but by chance, do you know the last time, if at all, that we raised the parks fee or any fee more than 5% in a given biennium?
I know we raised the street maintenance fee more than 5% a few years back. And I think it was, I don't remember exactly the situation, but I want to say it was commercial street maintenance fees. There was a big analysis done, and it was probably 2015, I want to say. I can get the exact details for you, but I don't remember a time that we raised the parks maintenance fee more than 5%.
Well, I'm always wary of any time we're making a decision to raise taxes. That's always a big deal. But I think that we have, you know, ever since the city passed a bond measure in 1998 to significantly update our park system, I wish Ken Warner were here to confirm this, but I recall when I was on the Parks Board, we set this goal that we were going to have a park within at least a mile of every single resident in the city. And thanks to the voters of the city, we have achieved that. And I think one of our assets is our remarkable park system. But we also need people to maintain that system because it has grown and the staff has not necessarily grown. I'm prepared to be accountable to voters and say that we raised your monthly utility bill $1.83 to bring 2 more full-time people onto staff to support our parks.
Thank you. Councilor Bialystowski.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to state my agreement with what Councilor Jones just said. I feel like our Parks Department has been understaffed for a long time, and we've seen charts that the acreage per staff member that they're required to maintain has just increased steadily over time, and staff has remained relatively flat in terms of increase. So I think it's important that we increase it because I think people like Mayor Walterson have high expectations for our parks and that they look nice, and especially in the light of the ice storm, I think there's probably even more work that could be done to make all of our parks nice. So I'll support the 15% increase. And I was going to ask staff, I don't know if it's feasible to explain to the voters or to the ratepayers, at least why we're doing this decision when we send out the bill, just so that they know that this is what they're getting for their, basically just justifying why we're doing this 15% or 16% when we usually do 5%. So I'm just going to ask that question if that's feasible or advisable.
I think we can most definitely, you know, say this is, it's going to be 2 people. To clarify, one of the things that I said was because it was 2 people, you know, and varying benefits and whatnot, I would say going up an additional $1 from where we were, which would be 16% total increase, would probably make the most sense to me, which would be $2.66 total increase versus 83-cent increase, and that would add $102,000 to the proposed budget in the revenue and in the expense. And it would generate approximately, well, 183 times. Approximately 180, a little under 187,000 total for those two park maintenance workers.
Okay, Sheila Waldron.
Thank you. So I just have a clarifying question. So I see in looking at the fee schedule that the rate increased 5% from 2019 to 2020. And then we're proposing the 16% increase from 2020 to 2021. So will 2021 to 2022 go back to that 5%, or will it be another 16%?
I think 2022's increase would go back to that 5% unless council decided at that point to change it. The fee schedule is approved by the council every June. So it would depend on what the council wanted to do next June, but it wouldn't need to go up the additional 16% at that point because we've already got that 16% in there this year.
Okay, thank you.
It would go up an additional 5% on top of the 16%, if that makes sense.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, any additional comments or questions? Anything related at all to the budget? Any topic we've discussed tonight before we head into the approval? All right, I don't see any. So Lauren, I have a procedural question here. So we do have the proposed wording of a resolution for the budget, but now we have some additional topics that we've been discussing. So do we need to incorporate those into the resolution as well?
Yes, I believe so. I think it might be best to go through each item like one at a time and kind of get a consensus on what everyone wants for each item versus trying to do one motion and then modify that back and forth. That would just be my idea of the best procedure. And so saying, is everyone okay with this increase for the body worn cameras? Is everyone okay with this increase for the building and planning line items? Is everyone okay with the 16% increase in parks fees, which adds 102,000 to the proposed budget? And then one other thing to add, I don't have it on my proposed motions, but I do think that I can't remember exactly. I think it's just at the council level that we have to approve the CIP, but for procedural purposes, just in case, if the budget committee could approve the CIP as is in the proposed with those two changes that were made in the spreadsheet online, that would be great too, to add that to the end.
Okay, do that last then.
Yeah, or whatever. Either way.
Okay, we'll put that on. We'll put that on for the end then. All right, so I like your suggestion of polling everybody regarding each individual change that we've been talking about tonight. So let's do this. Lauren, why don't you call out a change, and then we will see if anybody has any additional comments on it, and then we can just do a thumbs up, thumbs down consensus on those changes, I think would be appropriate. So
great. Okay, so the first item in the script here is increasing the public safety materials and services by 110 for body cameras, reduce reserves and public safety fund by 110 to balance fund.
Okay, so does anybody have any other comments on that?
And again, this would be to increase the budget, but then council would be coming back in June or hopefully soon to discuss if we are actually going to do it and build the policy upon that.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the clarification. I don't see any discussion, so let's just do a thumbs up if you support this, or thumbs down if you're not in support. So that looks fairly unanimous to me. So I think that one is definitely merits inclusion. So which topic? Go ahead, Lauren.
Okay, so the next item, this would be to increase the building fund fees and charges by $365,000, increase personnel services in the building fund by $150,000, and materials and services by $215,000 for increases in building revenues projected.
Okay. Any comments on that? Seeing none, let's take our vote. I think I see unanimous approval of that one as well, Lauren.
Great. The third item on here is the increase to the planning fund materials and services by $25,000 and reduce reserves by $25,000 to balance fund.
Okay. Any comments on that? Seeing none, let's go ahead and take our vote. And yes, I see unanimous approval on that one, Lauren.
Okay. The last item, I believe, well, there's actually, this kind of is a twofold item. So I think economic development as a whole, and I don't know if there was any proposed way to fund it, but there's a few different options. I think the two questions are, do we want to fund an economic development position at, I'm guessing 120,000 per year. That's the higher end of the range between 100 and 120,000. And then the second part of that question is, do we want to increase the Main Street grant from $20,000 to $32,000 per year? With that being said, the two of those, if we decided to do both of them or just one or the other, where those funding sources would come from. So we have $11,000 left over in the reserve amount, which actually would be a little bit less if we increase our expenditures, because it's based off of a percentage of how many of the expenditures are. So I'd be comfortable, you know, digging into reserves a little bit, but not too much. There was a question of reducing legal services, $90,000 per year, with the hopes that, you know, the council will come back and determine how that is going to be accomplished to stay under the 400,000. There was also some discussion of removing the newsletter from the city manager's department for $5,000 each year, and removing $3,000 from the city manager's training, travel, personnel related expenses, and $3,000 from the finance personnel related expenses for training and travel for both years. So the three of those equal about the 5 for newsletter, 3 and 3 for training and travel. So that's 11,000. And then there's about 90,000 from legal services. So then the question is where the other portion of the money comes from, or I think that's all about how you guys, whatever you guys decide for that.
Okay, so let's start with the extra funds for Main Street then, and that was a requested increase from 20,000 to, was it 31,000 or 32,000?
I believe it was 32,000 and some change, 32,240. John, do you know the exact amount?
I was just looking for it, Lauren. It's right in that neighborhood. I can't put my finger on it.
32,240 does sound familiar, but did we need absolute confirmation of that, or can we? No. Okay. So the funds for that could be then offset by the savings you mentioned from the newsletter, the training, the travel, in the total amount of 11,000. So we would be within about $1,000 or $1,200 then of a balance there. Is that close enough, or do we need to account for every dollar? I mean, when I say close enough, you know, I'm not, I don't mean to be throwing around $1,000 like it's nothing, but yet can that come from somewhere else, or do we have to identify every dollar?
I think at this point in the game, we do have to identify every $1,000, because we have to determine the exact amount that we're going to approve the budget for. And that's down to the $1,000. So I need to know exactly like what we're pulling from to add funds. Whether that be you, and maybe it's that council says we're increasing that amount, or the budget committee, I'm sorry, says that we're increasing the amount to Main Street to 31,000. And that's that, or we can pull another $1,000 from somewhere else. I'm sure, $1,000 we can figure out, but.
It looks like we have some comments here, so let's start. I think Jerry was first. Jerry?
Thank you, Chair. So I've had some conversations with council members and with Lauren and John today, and to the extent possible, just for clarity, I think it would be prudent for the city to look to use every dollar we can from the ARP as it relates to mitigating the economic effects of the pandemic for involved in this position creation, and with funding Main Street additionally, using that fund, using those funds for that specific purpose. There's a little bit of hesitancy, I should say, that during the second year of the biennium, that funding could be spent to mitigate the effects of the pandemic in 2023. In other words, that could be a stretch for it to be justifiable, and I just want to share that.
Okay, thank you. I think Mayor Walters was next.
Thank you. I had mentioned earlier, perhaps considering not the full $12,000 increase, but maybe half that, with the hopes that maybe her load will be lightened slightly by this new economic development person that we're going to be considering.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I believe Abby was next, Abby Farber.
I think so. I have deep concerns about this increase, and one, I think given where we've been talking about how we communicate with our community, and that not everybody is on the internet or Facebook or Nextdoor, as was shown during the storm, that getting rid of the newsletter, I think, is not a good idea. I think there are, we skew older in this community, and not that older means completely tech inept, but that this is losing an opportunity to get people who still do read paper. I'm also deeply concerned about the reliance on ARP funds for an ongoing position or an ongoing allocation. I think I said this very early on in these meetings that, relying on one-shots is what have brought a lot of communities down, have, put a lot of communities into fiscal crisis, and that I would rather see, whatever it was that we had initially been funding the chamber, perhaps with a small increase, is a better course to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Councilman Bialystowski.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question for staff. Do you anticipate that it's possible to use ARPA funding to give this increase to Main Street in some form? Like, could we give $5,000 or $10,000 to the historic line at Main Street from ARPA in some way?
John, if you want to step in.
Yes, you can give grants to organizations, again, with that pandemic recovery. If it was tied to that, you can do that.
Well, if I may follow up, I would just like to say that it might be more prudent to rely on those funds for the historic line at Main Street, because we can say that they're helping businesses recover from the pandemic still at this time, and it might be easier to dole out the funds that way, so that we're keeping in line with being able to fund the economic development position, because I'm a little concerned if we take 10,000 from the current budget, then we may not be able to get to that point where we have enough money to fund it economic development person. Thanks.
Councilor Baumgartner?
Thank you. I just wanted to reinforce what I said earlier about the value of what the director of Main Street has been doing over this past year, and that I'm discouraged a little bit to hear people not reinforcing that value. So hopefully those funds would materialize. If they don't, then that will be unfortunate. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Jones?
Thank you, Chair. At the start of our meeting tonight, the city manager suggested that this individual that's going to be a business support coordinator or specialist would be salaried somewhere around 65,000 or so, maybe less, and that with benefits and such, that would put the position in the $100,000 to $120,000 range. And so Lauren just led with 120, but I wanted to note that the city manager at the start said it could be in the 100 to 120 range. And then also, when Jerry spoke at the start of the meeting, he suggested that 100,000, the lower end of the range, would be covered by the package he proposed. So based on that, it sounds like we have a potential funding plan for the position.
Thank you. Abby Farber? No? Okay. All right. So again, let's take these one at a time. So extra funds for Main Street. There's a couple of different, I'm sorry, I still see some hands up. Lauren and Jerry?
If the position was funded at 100, Lauren, just correct me if I'm wrong here, it makes assumptions that they would have single coverage and anything else you'd add?
So what that range wasn't like a salary range. What that range would be funding the position at 65,000. However, we don't know what the benefit package will be like of the individual person. If someone comes in with single benefits and tier 3 of PERS, we were estimating around 100,000. If someone comes in with full family and tier 1 of PERS, then we would expect around 120,000. And that's why generally when I budget for the highest cost situation, because obviously we cannot hire based off of, what benefit package they're going to be getting based off their personal situation. So we don't know. So that's why I went with the 120,000.
Councilor Jones?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm going to have to defer to Lauren and Jerry and others that know more about this than I do. But one of the economic development directors that I've had email conversations with is the gentleman from Redmond. And it was actually, as I believe I shared earlier, was actually his suggestion that if you were to fund this position at a not a director level, but more of a coordinator level, that he thought the salary range could be anywhere from 40 to 65,000. So I want to note that in us saying the salary would be 65, we're choosing the larger end of that level that at least one other economic development person had suggested. So I don't want us to get too set on numbers when those may not be the numbers we ultimately have to do. I've heard most everyone in the call tonight suggest that they believe that this could be of great benefit to the city and that our businesses have the need. And so what I want to ask of staff is, I appreciate Lauren saying you're going to have to figure out where you're going to get that other 20,000 from, but respectfully, I'm going to ask Lauren as our budget expert to do that. She's the one that knows the budget and in working with the city manager. And if we know this is the goal intent of the budget committee, then we need some assistance from someone that knows the budget much better than I do to help us figure out how to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Abby Farber?
I have to say I'm really torn about this issue. I have heard really eloquently from Todd, from others, why the economic director is so important. And I can see us as a community growing. There is the potential for 43. And And I hear also eloquently about Main Street, Willamette, and, you know, can see what they do. I'm not sure that we can do both. And I, again, am worried about you know, we could do this and could be, you know, really run into issues of, you know, where do we cut come the next biennium? And, you know, we've already talked about adding staff to parks and, you know, other areas where we are increasing. You know, this would be an unfunded part of what we're doing. And I'm not sure if it's, I think we figured out how to do the development director, and I'm not sure we figured out how to give additional funds to Main Street. And I'm not sure, you know, again, if it's absolutely necessary if we bring in somebody full-time. So I'm very, very torn about this. Would love to hear from anyone else in the committee about what they're feeling.
Thank you, Abby. Anybody else with, yes, Councilor Bialystowski.
I think with respect here, Ann Fraser was first before me, so I'll let her go if that's okay with you.
Okay, I'm sorry, Ann, I didn't notice you. Please go ahead.
No problem. I do think that part of our responsibility tonight, if we're going to approve the budget, we have to approve a specific budget, and that we cannot just turn it back to Lauren to figure out the details. I think we have to have those details before we can actually approve it. With respect to these two items, if it does look, and I don't know what the details of this are, and I'm not sure Jerry does yet either, but if we could fund part of these positions in the short term from those ARP funds, then that makes a much less impact on the budget and would make it easier, even though in the future we may have to fund all of them or we may have to lay them off. But we should be able to balance this budget without a great deal of risk, as I hear John and Jerry and Lauren talking, with some of this large amount of money that's coming to the city for, because many of these things are in the short term are COVID related issues, and not quite so much the Main Street one, but certainly the business development. So, but I do think we're going to have to hammer out the details, but Lauren, you may want to confirm that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, I think we, as long as we stick within the guidelines, that we can partially fund this with ARP money. Yeah, as John and Jerry have mentioned before, that seems like it's within the guidelines for business recovery. It can't be used for general economic development work, but it can be used for business recovery related to COVID-19. And potentially a larger portion of it can be filled the first year. So it may be, let's just call it 60% of it in the first year is paid for by ARP and only 30% is paid for the next year. I don't know exactly if we can figure that out tonight, but we can move the money from the ARP funding in the non-departmental section to this line item if that's what we decide to do. I think the other, yeah, I think that's a good option there.
Thank you, Lauren. Councilor Bialystowski.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to respond to what Abby said a little bit ago and also what Councilor Baumgartner said. I definitely value what Rebecca does with Main Street. And the reason I asked if we could use ARPA funding to potentially give the $10,000 grant or $11,000 grant was so that to the extent that we can't do both in this budget that we're adopting tonight, that we could still be able to give her the funds that she's requesting just in a different way through the grant from ARPA rather than this budget. So I just wanted everybody to know, Councilor Baumgartner, know that I do support what Rebecca's doing. And to the end, on the topic of economic development director, I think if we do what some have proposed, which is the $90,000 cut to legal services, we'd be almost to what we need without drawing on ARPA funding. And I am a little concerned in the long term drawing on ARPA funding to fund the position, because I think it's concerning to constrain this person to not be doing general economic development when because under the guidelines of ARPA, but when some of what they could be doing is general economic development. So I think to the extent that we can fund the position with actual budgeted funds, a majority of it with actual budgeted funds rather than ARPA funding, would be better to not have the person be constrained in what they can do to the fullest extent possible. So anyway, those are my 2 comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Abby Farber.
Yep, I'm back. A question, I think, for Lauren and for Jerry, vis-a-vis the ARPA funds. On the one hand, yes, I'm not in favor of giving people funds that are one-shots, because people are people and you want to keep them on. And, I think it is difficult to say to someone, in 2 years, I'm sorry, we've run out of money for your position, although it does happen. I don't liking us building in something for that. So I have a general question for Jerry and Lauren. Do you have uses for all the ARPA funds, or is this by you moving ARPA to these purposes? Are we reducing something else you had plans to use the ARPA funds for?
So John Williams may have a response.
Well, I was going to address, I almost said this earlier in the answer to my last question. Unfortunately, the budget committee's work and the ARP figuring out work is just a little bit misaligned timeline-wise. We are working to understand the rules, put them together into an organized format, getting good advice from other communities and from our professional organizations, the League of Oregon Cities, National League of Cities. They're all putting out guidance. We just got one from the National Main Street organization. And so our plan has been to put all of that together, do some brainstorming at the director level, and then bring the council some options. So sort of roughing it out, bringing options, describing allowed uses, and having a conversation about that. But unfortunately, we're just not quite there tonight. I think we've been aiming for an early to mid-June landing for that discussion.
Okay, thank you. And Lauren, I see your hand up as well.
Yeah, I had a comment in regards to Councillor Bielostowski's comment about funding ongoing positions with the ARPA funding. And just an idea, I don't know if this would be something to consider, but if there was a concern about funding the economic development coordinator position, I think there would be a potential of taking, and this is kind of just moving money around, but moving the money from the grants to Main Street, the $20,000 that we have in there, using that money to pay for the economic development. Those are general funds. And then using money from the ARPA to pay the full $32,000 of the grant to the Main Street. So still including the grant to the Main Street in there, fully funding the economic development person with general funds in this biennium, and then using the ARPA funds if that's something that the council and budget committee are interested in doing.
Thank you, Lauren. Abby? Nope. Okay. All right. So we've heard several proposals here. Let me see if I can. Actually, Lauren, I liked what you just said. The last piece, I think makes a lot of sense. So I think we might be close on something here. So let me put out a proposal, unless somebody else on the committee would like to put forward a proposal as far as these 2 topics that we're talking about. Yes, Jerry?
Lauren, just so I'm clear, because I have the ARP rules in front of me, we would be talking about a grant to mitigate financial hardship, such as declines in revenues or impacts of periods of business or business closure. That's the sort of community grant that we would be looking to fund through ARP funds?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't, that's why I kind of thought it might need to be talked about a little bit more because
Right.
if it is just a general grant to Main Street, we obviously probably can't do that. But if, as John was saying earlier, if there, we can give money through to Main Street through the ARP fund, at least we believe. So if we could do it more under that grant, then I think we could move the money from, it's just an idea. This is not something that I've thought through really well, but moving that money out of the grants from Main Street, and if we could use that money and then use money to give the ARP money to give to Main Street. I don't know, John, do you have a comment on that? Because I feel like you're the one who's more knowledgeable on this ARP.
Well, I think if we were doing it to give them a specific piece of work related to pandemic recovery, that's how it would qualify. Or if it was a grant to them as a nonprofit for having lost revenue, but I'm not sure that's the case here. I think it would be for a work product.
Okay.
So that might not be the best option, but.
Yeah, an option. Okay. Councilor Baumgartner.
Thank you. I just wanted to express my concern over the tenuous nature of the funding, relying on ARPA funds for this additional monies that Main Street has asked for, and that they play such an important role, and it doesn't seem like a large amount of money that they're asking for, that I think we should approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Jones?
Thank you, Chair. I just continue to scan pages of the budget looking for potential sources, but I'm out of my element because I don't have the expertise of some of our staff, so I'm gonna need their help in responding to things. But for example, I'm looking at page 36 right now and our fees for our contract lobbyists. Now, I am extremely happy with the work I've seen from our contract lobbyists so far, and I'm grateful that we have that representation for us. The one thing I wanted to flag out of curiosity is that our budget for that individual is pretty constant from year to year. And yet I don't know whether our contract lobbyist focuses primarily on state legislature or other areas as well. But I want to note that our legislature in odd numbered years meets for 5, almost 6 months. But in even numbered years, our legislature only meets for a month. So I'm curious about the funding for our contract lobbyists, whether we kind of have it comes out in the wash because we give that person the same amount of money every year, or given how much our legislature's in place, why would we have the same funding in odd number years and even number years, since it seems that most of their work is focused on the state level?
We have a response from staff. Jerry?
I think John may know the answer to that. He's more familiar with the contract.
I am not certain I know the answer to that. I was not in charge of that. But I believe it may be that what we have is him on contract, not billing hourly, working for us on a variety of things where we get a lot more for our value in the legislature years. So I think it's having him on retainer rather than hourly billing. But Lauren, I think you might know better than I the answer to that one.
I think he has I'm not 100% positive, but I think he has a monthly rate for when they're in session versus when they're out of session, and it's very similar. It's not a significant difference of rate. So even when they're not in session, they still have a monthly rate going.
Okay. Councilor Jones?
No, I continue to scour. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So again, we have a couple of items. I'm sorry, Lauren, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing that I can think of is you know, we could do a transfer from one of the other general funds, like the Parks and Rec Fund or the Library Fund, that have a little bit more in reserves. Again, I'm going to caution everyone. I'm saying this as an option to fund these positions. However, we are running into a reserve deficit for next biennium. Anytime we pull more out of reserves, it's making our deficit worse. I'm just saying that this is an option for funding if we really want to find the funding, and we could potentially do a larger transfer from the Parks Department back to the general fund, because they're all general fund revenues, or the library fund for the remaining amount.
Okay, thank you. So does anybody have a proposal to fund either the Main Street or the Economic Development Coordinator position? Yes, Ann Fraser.
I just wanted to ask a question here about doing what Lauren has just suggested. If we were to fund these two entities, Main Street and the Economic Development person, by taking money out of reserves, and then in June we find that we can pay some of them, at least for the first year or perhaps the second year, from the ARPA funds, is there a way then to put that money back in reserves? Or how, you know, it's because of the timing, as John pointed out, that we can't make that decision exactly now. So can we be a little more elastic in balancing the budget that we need to approve hopefully tonight, and then afterwards rearranging some money? Is that possible?
Absolutely, yeah. So anytime we budget anything, and there's a lot of items in this budget, you know, that are really hard to judge exactly how much we're going to spend. Legal services is one of those items. You know, we can say here's $490 in the budget, and I like to say it's a budget, not a goal, and hopefully we come in a lot underneath that. And if we do, that's wonderful. That goes right back into the reserves for the next biennium. It continues forward to the next year in beginning, so ending fund balance, and it rolls forward to the beginning fund balance of the next year. And that's kind of one of the things that I was talking about earlier on in this budget cycle was, you know, there's a lot of items budgeted for in this budget, the emergency manager being one of them, that if we can use our funding on it, hopefully that will reduce that expense that we budgeted both under the ARP funding and the emergency manager position, and therefore the fund balance will grow. Our expense will not be 2 there, it will be 1, and we'll have that extra money roll forward to our fund balance for the next year, in effect our reserves. So anytime we have any savings at any of these line items, what it's doing is adding back to our reserves. It doesn't just, it's not use it or lose it. A budget is just that. It's, you know, it's a policy document that is a guideline. And we do have reserve requirement amounts, so we cannot pass a budget with deficits in our reserve requirements, because that's not meeting our policy. We can if the city decides that we want to, but if we are to go out for a bond, they will, the bond rating agencies will definitely look at that and say, you don't have your reserve requirements, you're not meeting your reserve requirements. And if there's not a reason that we can explain and how we're going to make that up in the next year, for example, if we said, oh yeah, this year we're, you know, going to dip into our reserves a little bit more, but we're expecting that this is happening next year. We know we're coming into a bunch of revenue next year, so it's going to go back to normal. That would be one thing. But if we don't have any expectation and we're dipping into the reserves for operating costs, they will lower our rates.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I'm on page 38 of the budget document right now. I wrote a note when we talked last week, folks, and I don't even remember why I wrote the note anymore, but I'm looking at line item that says personnel related expense on page 38 under city management. And for actual and estimate 2020 and 2021, the expenditure was 10,000 and 8,000 respectively. And then under the proposed biennial budget, it increases to 36 and 37,000. And I feel like we might have talked about this last week. I can't recall, but I wrote next to it, source of money for Main Street increase ? I don't even remember why I wrote that, but can someone visit that line item for us and talk about that more than tripling of that particular line item?
So,
Oh, Lord.
yeah, I can take the first stab, and then I think Jerry can add into there. So there's a couple things with this. Obviously, this includes training, travel, items of that nature, which obviously has not been going on for pretty much any of fiscal year 20 or 21. The department has this department has added virtually 2 FTEs. It really should be 4 under the actual for 2020. That's one of my notes to change. I think probably you all have it in there, but it's basically adding 2 FTEs. It is adding the deputy city manager from the economic development fund to that, and it's adding the new emergency operations person. In addition to that, Jerry wanted to put some extra funding in that training and travel for our communications employees to do specific communication training. But this is one of the areas where we deducted the $3,000 from help fund the position. So those would go down to 33 and 34,000. And Jerry, feel free to add anything that I missed or.
No, that's it.
So if I heard you correctly, this is training for individuals that are being brought under the city manager that have not previously been under the city manager?
Yes, so the deputy city manager used to be in the economic development fund. So if you look back on the economic development fund, it's bringing those personnel related expenses over from that fund, which are not significant in the last biennium, but if you look back to fiscal year 19, it was about 12,000. So it was adding, an inflationary amount from that. And then also adding funding for training of the 2 communications people and adding funding for the new employee that we're hiring under this fund. And this includes membership dues and fees for all the professional organizations that all of this staff belong to. Sorry, I'm forgetting my words. And then also training and travel and any other personnel related expenses. I believe it also includes, I'm pretty positive it also includes city issued cell phones.
Councilor Jones,
For those employees.
do you have anything else?
I guess one more, Chair, if you don't mind, turning to page
Sure.
42.
Yes.
So professional technical services under human resources moves from 118,000 in biennium 2021 to 201,000 in 2023. I feel like we might have talked about that one too, but that's a pretty significant increase from one biennium to the next.
We did, and hold on, let me look here and see.
Alyssa said that includes employment labor attorneys as well as training.
As well as what?
Training.
Yes. That is correct. That is employment attorney and negotiations and bargaining attorneys. I do not believe we had any bargaining in fiscal year 20. And the last one was in fiscal year 18, which you can see the amount is 123 in that year. And so I think that's spreading that across these next 2 years with the idea that we will be going into bargaining, or that we're starting bargaining for the police contract and then AFSCME in the following year. And then also legal fees that's for HR that we don't know exactly how much that's going to be.
Okay. Any other questions or comments right now? All right. So seeing nothing, I'd like to first address the extra funds for the Main Street request. And then we can talk about, I think, the Economic Development Coordinator, unless anybody thinks those should be linked together into one big topic. But I'd kind of like to address each one individually. So as far as the funds for Main Street, we have some options in front of us. We could leave it where it is at $20,000. We could fully fund the full $32,000 request, although we would need to come up with a full source of funds to do that increase. Or of course, we could do something in between. I would propose, just to get some discussion on the table, that we take the latter approach of something in between, and that we take $3,000 out of the training and $3,000 out of the travel budget, as has been proposed already, so that we're going from $20,000 to $26,000. And does anybody else have any comments or questions on that suggestion? I'm not seeing any. So
Could you possibly repeat that, Ed? I just wanted to get it one more time.
Sure, absolutely. So currently we're funding at $20,000. My proposal would be to increase that to $26,000 by taking $3,000 from the training budget and $3,000 from the travel budget, as has been proposed. And I see a couple of hands, and I'm not sure who was first. Was Councilor Baumgartner?
Lauren can go first. She might answer my question.
Okay. Lauren, did you have a comment?
I think my hand was still up from earlier. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that could we identify somehow additional assistance that they'll be getting to get some other funding from somewhere, these ARPA funds, or does that need to be spelled out necessarily?
Well, my proposal was to fund it at 26, fund that at 26,000 using the funds from training and travel. So there weren't any funds in there. But if you feel like the concern about the ARP funds, of course, is it's temporary, right? So we could add in ARP funds in an amount to fully fund it, if you wish, on top of if you're proposing that from 26 up to the 32,000, with the knowledge that it's a temporary increase.
Yes, I would like to propose that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Jones?
Thank you, Chair. You asked a moment ago whether we should do these together or one at a time. I personally don't know how I respond to your proposal without knowledge of how we would fund the business support coordinator position.
Okay, so you would prefer to have both of them linked together then? Okay. Lauren?
I think Councilor Baumgartner's question was if we were to put, say, 26,000 or 20,000 in the budget for Main Street, then when the council is, and I'm not positive this was exactly your question, but when the council comes back to deliberate on ARP funding in June, at that point, the council can allocate more from that ARP funding to the Main Street group, specifically for the purposes under the ARP plan. So saying that the grant is the only amount that they're going to get is not necessarily true if the council then therefore decides later to give them more funding under the ARP funds. Does that make sense?
Okay, I see a thumbs up, so I think you made sense. Abby?
I support Ed's proposal. I'm glad to see that Councilor Baumgartner feels satisfied with that. I think it is good to know also that should the council want to change once ARP becomes a little more focused, there's an opportunity to provide additional funding.
Okay, thank you. Jerry? You're still muted, Jerry. There you go.
Too many things to click on. I can wait until the next item, or maybe share this just now as it relates to just funding of these positions in general. Over the past 4 months, our legal services bills have been 21,000, 30,000, 26,000, and 26,000. We're averaging about 28,000 per month. That puts us significantly less than the 400,000 that's been budgeted for. That's a data set based on the last 4 months. And I in a call with Councilor Baumgartner earlier today, I said that in November of the past year, we hit 43,000 that we spent. There's a trend that we're spending less on legal services. But as we've talked about earlier, those are expenses that are difficult to anticipate. And oftentimes we have no control over. We could consider a reduction in legal, reduction in legal services for, I know we're supposed to meet on Wednesday night as well. I know that there's other, but I could bring this back to staff and say that we could examine across the board cuts in materials and services at a certain percentage to hit a number that we need. But I wanted to throw those two items out there for consideration that might be tangentially related to the item currently at hand, but I feel like this is a bigger discussion too, so.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Jones? No? Okay, Lauren, did you have a further comment? No, okay. So that's thank you, Jerry, for that proposal. I think, and Councilor Jones, I did hear, of course, that you prefer to have both of these items discussed kind of in tandem, and I understand your position there. So if we, for now, said that the Main Street funding would be 26,000 based on the 3,000 from each of the training and the travel positions, and a recommendation to fully fund the position using money from ARP, and then move to economic development, where again the request is $120,000. I think we can immediately take the $90,000 reduction in legal services from 490 to 400,000 and apply that to economic development, which leaves a shortfall then of $30,000 in funding that position. So I think maybe Jerry's suggestion of going back to staff and seeing if we can find a means to make some other small cuts in certain areas that would add up to a total of that $30,000 figure might be appropriate. Lauren?
I think another option, and Jerry, correct me if you're against this, but another option would be to, do a transfer from reserves of another fund, like the parks or the library fund, that are all general funds too. So it's not like we're stealing from the parks fund or the library fund. They're still within the general fund, and we give them general fund revenues to fill that extra 30,000 in cost. And then we can talk as a staff about where those items are going to be reduced throughout the next month, and not have to necessarily reduce it in the budget, but with the known idea that we are going to obviously strive to come in under budget in any areas that we possibly can, but not necessarily reduce those numbers in those specific line items and then run into a problem, if that makes sense.
I'm comfortable with that approach.
Thank you. Councilor Jones?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pull a couple things together that we've discussed tonight for consideration. So on the floor currently is an increase of 6,000 per year for Main Street from 20 to 26. On the floor currently is a reduction in legal from 490 to 400, which leaves 90 for a business support coordinator. Also on the floor is what Jerry suggested at the start of the evening was 5,000 from the newsletter, which potentially takes it to 95. So if I've heard Lauren correctly, one proposal is to borrow from another general fund to take care of the remaining 25, recognizing that there's the potential, not the guarantee, but the potential to replace that reserve from any one of three ways. Number one, American Recovery Plan funding. Number two, the potential for less need for legal services than we've currently budgeted, as Jerry just spoke to. Or number three, council going back through the budget with a fine-tooth comb and seeing what else can be done. So my question for Lauren and others is, can we tonight adopt a budget that says we'll budget for a business support coordinator at the tune of 120,000, borrowing from another general fund to fill the remaining 25,000, with the intent to explore those other three potential sources to possibly replace the revenue?
I think we absolutely can. I think I will need about 5 to 10 minutes to plug some numbers in my spreadsheet and just make sure that we're getting the exact amount correct. Because there is a lot of different moving components. So once we get to a point where we say, yes, this is what we want to do, I'll just need about 5 minutes or 10 minutes maybe.
Okay, I still.
Mr. Chair, given that question, after Ann and everyone else asks their questions, can I propose a 5 or 10 minute recess?
Certainly. So hang on just a second, but yes, I'm in agreement with that. So Ann?
Yes, I'm not sure, maybe I missed something, but I don't think there's a consensus amongst the budget committee at this point to remove the newsletter from the budget. I think there's been some arguments in favor of keeping it, and I think we should discuss that before we assume that we're going to take it out, and that maybe if we do not take that out of the budget, we could just simply take another 5,000 out of reserves and expect to replace it in some way in the future. But could we please have a discussion about that before we recess?
Yes, I think we should, absolutely. And I see several people want to comment on that, and I will add my comment right now to you, Ann. I agree with your statement and with what Abby said earlier. So I think we do need to have a decision on this newsletter and not just take that for granted. So with that, again, I'm not sure who is next. So let's go with Jerry. I see his hand up.
Sure, thank you. So I can talk about why I'm comfortable with the zeroing out of the newsletter. In my previous city, we put out a newsletter that was inserted in the water bill, and we tried highlighting other things going on, all these sort of things going on in the city that we were meant to generate attention or calls or whatever it might be. I noticed that we weren't getting any response, and what I then did was put my direct line into the newsletter about a specific item or two, and no one would ever call. And I'm very aware that the former city I worked in is not my current city, but that speaks to a little bit of my experience. The other thing I'll tell you is my grandfather started a grocery store circular printing business. So the idea of leaving things at people's doorstep is something that's near and dear to me, but I will tell you, they recently went out of business. So I have had a little bit of personal experience on this. And then finally, like, I'm aware too that I'm discussing this amongst a lot of politicians, but I have just general doubt about direct mail and how useful it is, because it generally said that you need to touch people 5 to 7 times before they start reading it or paying attention to it, and those costs just accumulate. And I think that, well, I can tell you one of the things that I've talked to Dylan and Alicia about is working more with the tidings to get our stories into that print, so that people see us there. That's my position on it. But I'm obviously open to opinions on it.
Thank you. Councillor Baumgartner.
Thank you. I just wanted to, before the newsletter were to be removed, somehow determine whether or not people are reading it, because I don't think it's safe to assume they're not, just because they're not responding to things. And I think especially right now, because of the disconnection of people and the isolation, especially for those who are not technologically connected, it would be just kind of exponentially impactful to have that. And we just don't know who's reading it. So if we could determine they're not utilizing it, it's not being useful, then I'm all for not wasting money, obviously. But I just would be concerned about removing it just suddenly.
Thank you. Councillor Bialostowski.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to agree with that approach. I agree with not removing it right now, because I think we do need to determine the utility of it and see how many people are reading, because I don't really know. I've never read it, but that doesn't mean other people in the community aren't reading the newsletter. So it's possible that we could do the $30,000 from reserves today, and in the month before the budget's actually adopted, it could be changed again if we determine that we're not utilized or utilized. We could remove that 5,000. Oh my God, I'm getting numb. I'm not a math guy. So we can revert back to not having the newsletter if we determine that it's in the best interest of the budget in the future. But for now, I feel like it's best to keep it, just to make sure that we're not doing something that people wouldn't like.
Thank you. Council President Aurelia.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, my comment is not necessarily about the newsletter, although I favor all forms of communication. But I don't mean to place anybody on the spot, but I know in conversations that I've had with the city manager, there's been discussion, if you will, about the organizational structure of the parties that he manages. And I'm just wondering if he would be willing to share any changes that he perceives in his FTE positions, and if any of those positions could be repurposed for this business development director position, perhaps combining a couple of positions instead of hiring a new position. And that's just something I'm throwing out as a potential savings in revenue and better economies of scale without the budget committee and everybody else trying to scramble for a few $1,000s here and there.
Sure. Thank you for the question. This is an ongoing conversation that I've had with John. We have talked about the year that we've had together, and that is to say that during the time that we've been here, our time has been spent responding to emergencies. And during the last few months, I feel like things have settled a bit. I think that we could make a concerted effort to budget time in our own schedules to go meet with business owners. I mean, one of the performance measures in the budget is number of face-to-face contacts with the business community. I think that through some time dedicated to that, John and I could meet more people, expand the network, get more people in touch with the city. One of the nice things that's nice about talking to the two of us is that we're good channels to get other work done. That is to say that if you meet with us, we can usually get you to the department that you need and get you in contact with the department that can help. One of the reasons I came to West Linn was because of its Main Street program. I helped start the program in one of the city I worked in Minnesota. And I love doing that work. And it's, you've heard me lament a few times that I wish I wasn't behind a desk all the time. And I like being out there and canvassing and meeting more people and networking. I think that there could be time in the next year for John and I to increase those connections and meet more people, be someone for the business community. John has been in an economic development role in the past. I can tell you that probably half the time I spent in Minnesota, we were working on economic development because increasing the size of our tax base was such a critical part, or directive of our council there. I'm not sure if John's still on the call, but if he is, he can add. I hope that answers your question, Councilor Aurelia.
Well, yeah.
I'm here. I don't have anything to add. I thought that was a good answer, Jerry. Sorry.
Yeah, I thank you for that. And, you know, I certainly understand the dynamics and the expertise that you bring, as well as Mr. Williams. I think I'm speaking more specifically about perhaps what Ms. Breithaupt talked about, which is giving city staff an opportunity to digest, you know, perhaps over a quick 10-minute discussion as we take a break on what they could do as a team to perhaps reorganize one of the positions that they currently have. And I'm not going to name a position, but reutilize, repurpose that position for the economic development position.
Okay, thank you. I was going to just comment on the newsletter. Perhaps we should put in there at the very bottom, a offer for the first 5 respondents from the newsletter get a $10 Starbucks gift card or something like that, and then we'll really see who's reading it or not. But anyway, with that, I would like to take a break, quick break. Yes, Lauren.
There was one other item that I think everyone agreed on it, but I don't think we did a thumbs up, thumbs down on the park maintenance increase of 204,000 for the biennium, 102 a year, which would be increasing the parks maintenance fee revenue by 204,000 for the biennium and increasing the personnel services by 204,000 in the parks maintenance fund, which be increasing the parks maintenance fee to 16% this year. So an additional 11% over what we normally do, for a total of $2.66 total, or $1.83 more than what we normally do.
And I'm seeing a thumbs up already from the mayor on that. Do we have any discussion? If not, let's go ahead and do a thumbs up on that one if we wish, or a thumbs down. So it looks to me like I'm seeing thumbs up, consensus. Yes. Okay. So that one we're good on. So yeah, Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to reiterate, I thought something that Rory said earlier. If we do this, then I'd really like us to be out front in explaining to West Linners what we've done and why. Because when you say 16%, it sounds uncomfortable to me, an increase in a fee. When it's $1.80 per household, as long as we are confident that that's funding 2 full FTE to support our parks, that's a better sell. So I would just want us to make sure that we're out front with that explanation as to what we did and why we did it and how it's going to benefit the city. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes, and why don't we take a 10-minute break? And so we will reconvene in about 3 minutes after 9 o'clock. Please be prompt. Thank you.
So Todd, was it a crazy first day back at school after you're getting back late last night?
You know, strangely, it felt pretty smooth.
Awesome.
Yeah, mainly we're just trying to get through this year. The kids, bless their hearts, they're just spent. It's too long staring at a screen and they're just done.
I can relate.
Yeah. We're just trying to support them as best we can and get them through to the end.
I'm muted. Where did your daughter graduate from, Todd?
Oh, thank you. She attended a small private school in North Carolina called Elon.
Interesting.
Elon University.
Cool.
We've been extremely impressed with the school. She's had
Nice.
a marvelous experience there.
Nice. I'm in favor of small universities. My son went to Reed and had an excellent, I mean, the staff student ratio there is just so phenomenal.
Yeah, if you're familiar with North Carolina at all, it's sandwiched between Greensboro and Raleigh.
Oh, nice. Nice, nice. Very good.
Abby, I was on the other side of the fence at Reed because I taught there for a while.
Oh, goodness. Yep. Elliot graduated in, what is it now? 2021, 2018, I think it was that he graduated. And part of him going to Reed was us coming to visit and realizing we really like it out here.
Well, I was there from 83 to 89.
Marvelous. What was your department or?
Biology.
Marvelous.
Okay, our time has expired. Thanks to everybody for being back on time. I just want to check in with Perrin Lim, see if Perrin is back.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, great. Excellent. And Jerry and John?
Jerry's actually on the phone right now. He'll be done in a second.
Okay, great. All right. So we left off, I think Lauren was going to do a little research, a little spreadsheeting regarding the Economic Development Coordinator position. There's Jerry. Thank you. So Lauren, did you have any suggestions or comments regarding what you found?
No, I'm just trying to make sure everything balances and get a correct motion, but I did have a clarifying question. So is what we're talking about currently is keeping the Main Street amount at the 20,000 and then using ARP funds for it, or is it's increasing it by the 6,000 from the finance department and the city manager's 6,000? Okay, so
that was my proposal, was yes, to increase it with the 3,000 training and the 3,000 travel budget.
Okay.
And then I think there was a request if we could add a
Right.
aspirational statement to fund the rest of it with ARP money up to the 32.
Okay, sorry, I got a little mixed up on one thing, so I'm just finishing up a couple items.
Okay. So while Lauren's finishing, does anybody else have any other thoughts or comments regarding these couple of topics? I think there are last items we need to clarify before we can move to a vote to approve the budget. Yes, Ann Fraser?
I just have a procedural question. If Lauren is changing this budget now to be a different budget than what we have been discussing, do we need to have it in our hands before we approve it, or are we going to just approve it on faith that it's the way the way it's supposed to be? I'm wondering whether it might be prudent for us to actually have the revised budget sent out to us by email, because it can come as or maybe as something posted on the website, some electronic means, and then just take 20 minutes on Wednesday to approve it. I'm just a little uneasy approving this, something that we really haven't seen.
So can I answer that?
Sure, go ahead,
Yes,
Lauren.
please.
Didn't mean to interrupt you, Ed. So generally what we do is with changes like this, we outline all of the changes, and that's kind of what I'm drafting right now is the motion of anything that changes. And so that you'll be able to see that. I have typed in the changes to the budget document, but they're obviously not formatted or anything like that. I'm doing it, really quickly on the fly here, but I have, I'm typing up the proposed motion so that it would outline each change and what they are. And hopefully that would be helpful.
And I see this as, Anne, is no different than, say, the planning commission where they put conditions of approval on a development, for example, and that's all done during the meeting, and then, it's formalized in writing at a point later. So I think we could move ahead tonight. With that, Mayor Walters.
Yeah, I was just going to add, thank you, Chair, that Council President Aurelia and Councilor Bielostowski and I have a South Fork Water Board meeting on Wednesday night that we double booked ourselves. So if we did have to get together really briefly, it would have to be, like Anne says, 10 to 20 minutes so that we could make it over to that meeting as well.
Okay, well, I think we're pretty close to having a resolution and a vote here this evening. We'll just have these last two items to finish up, and I think if we can find the funding for the Economic Development Coordinator, I think we'll be in good shape to go ahead and proceed with a vote this evening. Finish our work. Yeah, Mayor Walters again.
I was just going to throw this out there to see if it would help at all, but do you think funding this as perhaps like a 0.75 FTE would make sense to anybody, or are we dedicated to this being a full-time position?
I'll let staff comment on that.
I think we're open to anything. I think that would save some funding and still provide 32 hours of work a week.
Okay, so that's another option we might have before us. Councilor Baumgartner.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this question would be for John or Jerry, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the grant to Main Street currently specifies the funds for the program manager. Would it be better, or would there be an opportunity to reword that to be more generally allocated funding would that help in getting the ARP funding at a later time?
John, I think so, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think if we were to use some ARP funding for that transfer, we would make it specific to pandemic. We would write in something about that amount of funds should be used for pandemic recovery.
So the grant wording doesn't need to be different at this time for Main Street?
Lauren, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, no, I don't think